April, and it was snowing then too. And Dr. Gulliford is a history professor at the Fort Lewis College in Durango. And he has written, I think, 8 or 10 books. And this book that he's talking about tonight is his best. It really is. And his others are very good. But this is amazing. This is an amazing book. Can't recommend. Yeah, I've read it twice, and I recommend it heartily. So, without much further ado.
Sure, thank you. So yes, if you want it to snow in April in Georgetown, call me, and I'll drive up from Durango and we'll make it snow. So, well, it's a delight to be here. The book I talked about the last time was Outdoors in the Southwest, an adventure anthology. And since then, I've done 3 books. And one of them is called The Woolly West, Colorado's Hidden History of Sheepscapes. And everybody writes about cowboys and cattlemen, and nobody writes about sheep herders. And there were plenty of woolies in Colorado. And in fact, they were here earlier and stayed longer because it's easier to move sheep. And of course, sheep do far better in the high country than cattle. And so whenever the mining boom started to happen, there was a market for mutton. And that was certainly true with the California gold rush. And so the first ricos in New Mexico, the first wealthy Hispanic families, got that way by bringing sheep out of New Mexico. They paid $1 or $2 for those sheep in New Mexico. 3.5 months later, they sold them in Sacramento for $12 a piece. So sheep and mining go together. So if you want that talk sometime, we'll have to do it. I've also done a book on wolves. We reintroduced a book published in 1929 called The Last Stand of the Pack. And it was written by Arthur Carhart, the largest conservation library in the state. At the Denver Public Library is the Arthur Carhart Library. And this book had sort of disappeared. A friend of mine told me about it. We found it, and then it was a race. Because what happens is Google searches international copyrights 24 hours a day, and the instant something goes out of copyright, Google snatches it. And so we had just a few months to find who owned the copyright, get permission to republish it, and we did with the University Press of Colorado. And that's a really interesting book because it's about the last wolves killed in Colorado who were so famous locally they had nicknames. And how bizarre is that, to have wild animals with nicknames? Well, now that the state has voted to bring wolves back, this is an important history because it's why we got rid of them in the first place. The book tonight, however, is on Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. And I will be talking about that, showing images of it. And I was there, we were there last Sunday. And just to let you know, it was 77 degrees. So, when you need to escape, you just get back on that interstate, go to Moab, take a left, let's see, a left, go 100 miles south, you're in Bluff, Utah, and Bears Ears is 4 miles away. And it is amazing. It's 1.35 million acres, and the first national monument ever advocated for by tribes. So here we have a 1906 law signed by Theodore Roosevelt intended to set aside national monuments, and nobody in 1906, Native Americans weren't even citizens, couldn't vote, couldn't serve on a jury, and here they are now, over 100 years later, actively advocating to preserve some of their landscapes. And so it's really an amazing place, not only because of what's there, but because of this process of having Native Americans at the table for co-management. So I'm going to talk about that. I'll read from my book, Bears Ears. And the subtitle is important. It's Bears Ears, Landscape of Refuge and Resistance. And so it's a very interesting place. And as a historian, I love the rural West. I always write about rural topics. But never had I done a whole book just in one county. So San Juan County, Utah is 3.5 million acres. And this is 11,000 years of history. We're pretty sure, and I'll show you an image, of a mammoth, a petroglyph mammoth. So, you know, a Pleistocene animal that somebody designed on a rock. That is amazing. There's maybe 3 or 4 or 5 such things in all of North America. And that image is also now in the National Monument. San Juan County, Utah is a lot like Georgetown. 16,000 people, a little more than Georgetown. But the entire county, 3.5 million acres, only has 2 stoplights. And it's really not fair because one doesn't blink. You know, it's not a full stop. It kind of blinks at you, but it doesn't really go red. So it's only got 1 stoplight in 3.5 million acres. 92% public, state, or tribal land. So it is really easy to be in the middle of nowhere fast. And everybody drives through on their way to Monument Valley or the Grand Canyon, and we wave at them. My wife and I have a house in Bluff, Utah, and we sit on the front porch and we get a drink and we play Red Truck. And in Red Truck, we count the red trucks. And if you go back in the house for salsa and chips, I'm still counting red trucks, so you're going to lose. So, you know, we haven't written down the rules yet, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah. So, my wife and I were in Southeast Utah on the day that President Obama declared the 1.35 million acres Bears Ears National Monument. With a stroke of the president's pen, those serpentine canyons, mesas, meadows, and slick rock sanctuaries became a new national monument. Some local residents in San Juan County were furious with the president's action. Others were ecstatic. The first words in the proclamation are beautiful. Quote, "Rising from the center of the southeastern Utah landscape, invisible from every direction, are twin buttes so distinctive that in each of the native languages of the region, their names is the same, Bears Ears." For the first time in the 110-year history of the Antiquities Act, Native American tribes actively campaigned for a national monument. So let me talk a little about the law, because it's an amazing law and Congress would never do anything like it again, ever. First off, it's only 5 paragraphs. It's a federal law that's a page and a half. And the reason Congress would never do it again is because it provides executive powers. It takes authority away from Congress and gives it to whoever's in the White House. So Theodore Roosevelt signs this law in June of 1906. The same month he creates Mesa Verde National Park. And then he starts to have fun because he gets to declare national monuments of historic and scenic and scientific value from any public lands. And believe me, Teddy's favorite words were, "I declare." I declare. He loved declaring things. He's going to give us our first wildlife refuges. He's going to protect 230 million acres for Americans, including what's out the door, the Arapaho National Forest. He is just an amazing conservation president. And by the way, when he does the Arapaho National Forest, he has lost the authority to do so. Congress got so mad at TR that they rescinded the 1891 Forest Reserve Act. And he didn't have the power he didn't have enough votes for the veto. So he clears out a room on the 2nd floor of the White House, takes all the furniture out, gets in there with a male secretary and Gifford Pinchot from the Forest Service. The only thing in the room is the floor covered with maps. And in the few hours before midnight of when he's going to lose that power, he declares another 12 million acres of national forest, including the one out your door. So that was Teddy, you know, pretty interesting guy. So he's got this new law. The first national monument is Devil's Tower in Wyoming. He will do Chaco Canyon. He'll do a number of them. And then the politicians in Arizona refuse to do anything with the Grand Canyon. So Theodore does. And he sets aside Grand Canyon as a national monument at 800,000 acres. And there's a sentence in the Antiquities Act that says the president can set aside these national monuments, quote, in the smallest acreage possible. And Teddy does 800,000 acres for the Grand Canyon. Arizona politicians go apoplectic. They sue the president. Teddy's out of office. It goes to the Supreme Court. And unanimously, the Supreme Court says in 1920, Theodore Roosevelt has passed on by then, that yes, it's an executive authority and the president can do that. Well, President Biden just did that with Camp Hale. And so he's now listening to tribes on some other things. He's done 2 more national monuments, one in Nevada and one in northern Arizona. These are very popular locally. And so it's fascinating tracing the history of this and then using Bears Ears as a case study. My next book, which is out for review right now, I'm going to look at the whole system. So having tackled Bears Ears at 1.35 million acres, my next book will be all 37 million acres, 11 western states, and Alaska. And I hope that one gets off the ground, but it's really fascinating. Every president has used this law, including President Trump. President Bush declared a big national monument out beyond Hawaii, an underwater national monument. So it really is an effective executive use of authority. But that doesn't mean locals like it. And that's what happened in Utah, believe me. So San Juan County folks got upset, and yet very close to Bears Ears is Natural Bridges National Monument, Rainbow Bridge National Monument, Edge of the Cedars and Goosenecks as state parks, Grand Gulch and Dark Canyon, some of the most amazing wilderness areas in the country, Valley of the Gods, Monument Valley, the Moki Dugway, which is quite a road to drive. You know, you guys paved your Quinella path. You can't pave the Moki Dugway. It's going to be gravel for a very long time. Muley Point, Sand Island. So I want to read just a quote here from Terry Tempest Williams about canyons, but particularly Red Rock. She says, "For as far as I can see, the canyon country of southern Utah extends in all directions. No compass can orient me here, only a pledge to love and walk the terrifying distances before me. What I fear and desire most in this world is passion. I fear it because it promises to be spontaneous, out of my control, unnamed, beyond my reasonable self. I desire it because passion has color, like the landscape before me. It is not pale, it is not neutral. It reveals the backside of the heart. As the world becomes more crowded and corroded by consumption and capitalism, this landscape of minimalism will take on greater significance, reminding us that through its blood-red grandeur, just how essential wild country is to our psychology, how precious the desert is to the soul of America." So, this is an amazing landscape. The 5 tribes that supported this national monument are the Navajo Nation, the Ute Mountain Utes in Utah, the Northern Utes in Utah, the Hopis, and the Zunis. They have never agreed on anything before. So this is really unprecedented. And in my book, I've got chapters on prehistory, chapters on the Navajo, chapters on the Utes, And I had to do mining, of course. Only what is it in southern Utah? Uranium. Right. So I've tracked down some really good Charlie Steen stories. And so it was really fun. And the thing about being a historian is I don't have to make it up. I just have to find it. And so you've got a great speaker coming next month on Alice Eastwood. Wait till I tell you some Alice Eastwood stories. Because she went from Denver down to Durango, and then she is in Bears Ears long before anybody, as a botanist, the first. So it's just an amazing place. It is truly a palimpsest. A palimpsest. So you may have some old buildings here in Georgetown where you've got advertising on brick and it kind of comes through and it's got different generations. Think about palimpsest for cultures. Think about 11,000 years of human history in the same place. You know, I hike it all the time, and I have found, you know, a 2,000-year-old spear point called a Christmas tree point because it's jagged like a Christmas tree. We've found sherds of all kinds and arrowheads. And as the mammals declined, as the animals got hunted and eaten, the points get smaller and smaller until at the very end, when the ancestral Puebloans finally leave, you know, they're eating rats. There's nothing left to eat. And so the points just are tiny and you can see it. I lead a tour once a year for Mesa Verde. I've been on the Mesa Verde Foundation board, and I work with a guy from Zuni, and he is excellent. And we do sandals. He's talked about sandals and how sandal design is actually better 2,000 years ago than it is 800 years ago because everybody's searching for food and they don't have time to do the really fine sandal weave that they do earlier. And so it's so interesting to have this big landscape like Bears Ears and now to be working with tribal people on interpreting artifacts, finding things. So it's really very different from the national park experience. And so a lot of what I write about is the Bureau of Land Management. And let me tell you, if you're gonna go hike or you're gonna do something on BLM land, here's the big three. The grand slam is A, if you get an outhouse, B, if you get a parking area, and C, if you get one trail sign, because that's all you're gonna get. So no paved paths, no park rangers, it's different. And people keep getting lost, but now there is a justifiable, really exciting movement on dark skies and the night skies. And one of the hottest places to do that now is in a BLM National Monument in northern New Mexico called the Bisti Wilderness, which is next to the Denazin Wilderness. And people are going out there and waiting for the Milky Way to come through all these interesting rock formations. And then they're lost and they can't figure out where they put their truck because you don't leave a track. The soil is such that you have no idea where you started. And so the BLM, you know, search and rescue is kind of a big deal. It's like, all right, where did those people go? So there's this palimpsest, and then of course, the first white people who show up are Mormons. But they're coming from the west in the largest wagon train eastbound in the history of the United States. So those are the Hole in the Rockers, and Brigham Young, before he dies, realizes, uh-oh, there are Coloradoans getting close to Utah. So he knows our little train is being built to Durango, and he's worried that non-Mormons are going to start to penetrate southeast Utah. So he wants to reestablish a community. There was one in what is now Moab, but there was never one in the real southeast corner. So he orders a mission, and these poor, you know, Mormon settlers, many of them Danish, Scandinavian, English, Scottish, who have made this long, long trek to Utah, started their farms, are told to abandon their farms, get their wagons and move to southeast Utah. And instead of doing it in any sensible way, which would have been to take what is now Highway 160 and sort of go around the Colorado River and come into, cross the San Juan River, they decide to go through the canyons. And these canyons are still, I mean, some of the most remote wilderness in the lower 48, and they're doing it in wagons. And Hole in the Rock means there's a place where they cross the Colorado River in what is now Lake Powell, and they make a mistake and they're on this cliff, and they lower these wagons down about 1,000 feet and then float them across the river. It's just an amazing task. Anyway, they were supposed to go to Montezuma Creek, Utah. They get to Bluff and they say, this is it, we're not going any further. So the town of Bluff, and I don't think Georgetown ever had these high aspirations, but Bluff called itself Bluff City. Yeah, Bluff City. I mean, today it's only 260 people, so how it could ever have thought itself as a city is pretty interesting. So that's the other group. And that's the group that will, just like the Native Americans, use those same two words of refuge and resistance. Because as the U.S. Marshals start looking for Mormon communities when we've got a federal law against polygamy, here these families are hiding out in the canyons, and some of them decide, we're not going to stay here, and they go all the way down to Mexico, and then lose everything again when Pancho Villa starts the Mexican Revolution, and they creep back up to Blanding and Monticello and Homestead, and so it's a really fascinating Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints history, but it butts heads with the Navajo history and with the Utes. And it's a history that's very much alive. So my wife and I were in Salt Lake City literally last Friday at a conference, and of course in Salt Lake the Mormon presence is very real, very much everywhere. But trying to figure out how to work in the native part of that is really important. And it's there in southeast Utah, and it's certainly there in Bears Ears. As for the darkness, this is in President Obama's proclamation. Quote, from earth to sky, the region is unsurpassed in wonders. The star-filled nights and natural quiet of the Bears Ears area transport visitors to an earlier eon. Against an absolutely black night sky, our galaxy and others more distant leap into view as one of the most intact and vast roadless areas in the contiguous United States. Bears Ears has that rare and arresting quality of deafening silence. Pretty interesting place. And I'm going to tell you about one sort of rock formation to explain this cultural complexity. So it's on Comb Ridge, and now there's a highway that goes through it, the only two-lane asphalt. And so Comb Ridge is the long north-south escarpment, and there are very few north-south escarpments. Most mountain ranges in America go sort of southwest or northeast, but they don't go straight north-south. And this ridge, the Mormons saw some rocks, a rock formation up top, and because they were Scottish, they called it Highland Mary. Same rocks, same place. The Navajos had hunted up there. They killed a big Rocky Mountain bighorn. Well, you have Rocky Mountain bighorns. They had a desert bighorn. And so they named it Big Sheep's Balls because apparently the ram they got was well endowed. So here you are, same rock outcropping, totally different take on what to call it. And I just find that, one of the cultural complexities here. So I want to read from my book, and then I'll show some images. So you've got to imagine, hiking into these places, and one of these it was with Beth and Bill, and I'll tell that story. It has been years now since I cowered on that ledge, with the canyon bottom hundreds of feet below me, and the cliff top hundreds of feet above. I was terrified, unable to move from fear. Oh, I could continue to crawl all right, but the 4-foot ledge angled out toward a sheer drop-off, perhaps 500 feet below. So you have to understand the ledge we're on, and Beth was there, you know, it doesn't go like this. It goes like that. Yeah. And it closes like a oyster shell. So you can't stand up, and it's tilting out. And ravens made large turns below me and then slowly ascended in updrafts. There was no way to stand up. My heart pounded against my rib cage, sweat ran off my hands, I could not swallow, and we still had not made it around the corner to the ancestral Puebloan ruin we sought. The morning had started off in bright sunlight, a spring breeze, a walk to the edge of a cliff. With binoculars, we stared down at a thin ledge on a sandstone cliff with a stacked stone mortared wall as a barrier to entry, then a habitation room block, an even narrower ledge, and a small room with a still sealed ancestral Puebloan door. Something had been piled near the room, but even with the best of binoculars, it was hard to tell what the objects were. So we've seen this site from above. Now we're going to try and figure out how to climb into it. And when we finally get down to that ledge and we're walking it, it's covered with marbles. Now, whether the ancestral Puebloans put those little rocks there or whether they were there geologically, you can't walk on marbles on a cliff without looking down, which was perfect for an archer in front of you to slip an arrow into your chest. So it's a very, very defensive site. Believe me. So before we got there, we stared, laughed a little nervously, and agreed that sure, we would try to walk that ledge. My happy Labrador pup had no idea what we were planning. He was just glad to be outdoors in canyon country with plenty of fresh smells and a small sandstone pockets of water. As we began our descent a mile or so distant from the ruin we had spotted, I wondered how difficult the trail would be. And then I realized there was no trail. Where we were headed, no one had been in years. Visualizing those sheer angles of the cliffs and the narrowness of the ledge, I knew why. So I'm terrified. And it's not a good idea to move forward on a cliff when you can't control your nervous system. So I have got to calm down, and I don't know how to do it. I'm sitting there, a couple people are ahead of me. I don't think I'm the last, but I'm stuck on this ledge. And I always carry a little birder's pair of binoculars. So I pull them out, and I'm looking around, and I'm looking at those ravens, and I'm saying, oh, well, they're not that far away. The bottom's not that far away. I'm not up here this high. Anything to control my autonomic nervous system, bring my blood pressure back down, get my palms not as sweaty, and it worked, and I crawled around the cliff, and there we were. And at one point, we're in a room that has a Mesa Verde style T-shaped door. In the room, I'm sitting in the back of the room, and I'm looking at the T-shaped door, and I am so comfortable. I am so safe. I feel like I'm in my mother's womb. And then it was somebody, could have been Beth, that said, come on, we gotta finish this. And then we're back crawling around the ledge. We get to the edge, and there's another room, there's a door which we didn't open. Was still sealed. The material we saw, which we couldn't identify, was actually wood that had been piled there 800 years ago and was still there, roof beams. And then there was this opening in a window in this room, and you go to the edge of that and you look down, and it's like being in a 10-story building with no glass, looking out a window. Amazing. And then we turned around. I've got a great shot of Beth, crawling behind me I'm wearing 2 cameras, bandolier style. What a day. We made it out easily enough. We had a few scratches and bruises, but no one panicked and no one fell. I cannot imagine how hard it would have been to take that route every twilight after farming small patches of corn on the canyon rim. Hauling water was women's work, and I can barely conceive of the poise and balance it would have taken girls and women to bring cool pottery jars full of water along that dangerous ledge. When we finally made it back to the curve of the canyon with tree limbs to touch, we were laughing and joking, stunned by our own accomplishment and in awe of the persistence and determination of the elders. My lab was overjoyed to see me and vowed never to leave me again. He didn't. We spent the next 12 years hiking canyon country, and he never left my side. I promised my wife I would never go where my dog wouldn't go, but I didn't tell her that he had 4-paw drive and an excellent sense of balance. So let me bring you up to date with the speaker you're going to have next month, and Alice Eastwood. So in this male world of Mormons and, you know, the occasional prospector, by the 1880s, here's this woman, a botanist, who graduates from Denver High School, invests in real estate in Denver, teaches high school, invests in real estate in Denver, invests in real estate in Durango, makes enough money, she quits working, and all she does is plants. So you're going to hear about that next month, including, I mean, the guy she's with basically knew everything Darwin did, just Darwin beat him to the punch on publishing his book. But, so Alice Eastwood is this incredible person. She definitely needs her own biography. She named 125 new plant species. In her lifetime, she wrote 310 scientific articles, named 395 plant species in several states, had 17 species named for her. At age 68, on a botany trip in California, she walked 20 miles the first day and 10 miles on day 2. She officially retired at age 90. What an interesting person. And she is there. I think I've got a slide, but here's a picture of her. When she goes into Bears Ears, she is absolutely violating all the Victorian conventions. First off, she's riding a horse. She invents her own split skirt so she can ride a horse. She's going into the canyons with a married man, one of the Wetherell brothers, as a guide. A Mormon widower tries to marry her. She says, no thanks. Just an amazing person. And then she's leaves Colorado, winds up in California, San Francisco, California Academy of Sciences, and she's there in 1906. When the earthquake hits, San Francisco's on fire. She's in a 4-story building. The stairs are falling off, and she's running up to the 3rd floor to rescue plant specimens. Plant specimens. She's saving the California Academy of Sciences plant specimens. She hurried into the collapsing building, to climb 5 stories of twisted railing on broken stairs to retrieve 1,497 specimens. Fires erupting down the block. She retrieved the Academy's historical records and irreplaceable botanical specimens by her quick thinking and hiring a team and wagon to haul them to safety. She says, quote, "My own destroyed work I do not lament, but it was a joy to me while I did it, and I can still have the same joy in starting it again." She loses every single piece of her personal property, all her clothes, for plants. And then she goes at it again. I mean, she needs a biography. She needs a film. What an amazing person. So, one of the things I discovered that I knew was there, but it was difficult to track down, was pot hunting. illegal grave robbing, illegal, what's now illegal, pot hunting in bear seers. And that's one of the most important things about the Antiquities Act. There's two parts of that law. Number one, the president can set aside national monuments. Number two, it's the first law in the world that protects indigenous burials. So the Antiquities Act says you cannot dig up an Indian burial on public land without a federal permit. So the universities will start to get those permits. But in the meantime, there are a lot of pot hunters, and 1893 is not a good year in Colorado for all sorts of mining reasons. The cattle markets collapse, so cowboys become pot hunters. Cowboys start going into caves looking for Indian relics because we're about to have the Chicago World's Fair. And part of the Chicago World's Fair is telling Europe, telling the rest of the world that yes, okay, so maybe we're only 100 and so many years old, but we have this magnificent landscape. So there's a market for 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old ancestral Puebloan items, and that includes mummies. It includes burials. And that becomes the hottest item for pot hunters, is to find mummies. And I was able to prove all that. I found at Brigham Young University in their special collections a pamphlet that came from Durango on two miners who gave up mining to start prospecting for Indian relics. And this was the catalog of what they had found and what they were selling, and it included skulls and arms and legs, and so it's horrible. But nobody had done a complete sort of history of pot hunting in Bears Ears, and so I've made an attempt at that, and it's part of it. So, as we move into 1890s, early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt is establishing national forests. He established yours. He establishes the Manti-La-Sal National Forest in Utah. And the Mormon ranchers who got there in 1881 are not happy with oversight. They don't want to be under anybody's control. So this is what I love about history, is the way things intersect. Does anybody know the name of the famous photographer who photographed New York City's slums at the turn of the century?
Jacob Riis?
Jacob Riis.
Yeah.
Jacob Riis had a son who became one of Gifford Pinchot's first foresters. And so this guy's son is on the Manti-La-Sal National Forest. His job is to get the Mormon ranchers to pay grazing fees, pay attention to things. He's just starting off. It's a Sunday afternoon. He's in his log cabin in his underwear. Now, what does that mean in 1907? What kind of underwear would that be? Yeah, red long johns, right? Well, here come a rancher's family, a really big guy with really big sons. Armed rancher Parley Butts, with 4 adult sons in tow, stormed into Reese's cabin one morning and shouted, "We cowmen came into this country before Uncle Sam even thought it worth looking at. When God finished making the world, he had a lot of rocks left over, and he threw them down in a pile in Utah. But we took it and settled it. We killed off the Indians and the rattlesnakes and built roads and bridges to get in here. We put up with all hell and damnation to make our homes here, and never a bit of help did we get from Uncle Sam while we were doing it. Now, when we get the country halfway fit to live in, you come in here and tell us how much grass we can have, and that we have got to pay for it, and that we can put our cows on this here mountain for so long and no longer. By God, we will like hell. This is our country, and we aim to keep it." What would you do if you were in your underwear? Somebody said that. So Mr. Reese said, "You know, Parley, you can shoot me, but there will be other forest rangers. Let's just sit down and talk about this. You have overgrazed this range. There have been too many sheep, too many cattle. Our goal is to make it work for your children's children. So, really interesting confrontation. And again, finding all that historically, finding that memoir was pretty exciting. And then up into the 1930s, there's a reporter who happens to get over to the Four Corners, Ernie Pyle, before he goes into the Pacific in World War II. It gets to the Four Corners and he jokes and says, you know, I had to get to the Four Corners. I wanted to do it before Eleanor Roosevelt got there. And of course she never did. And those of you, if you've been to Southeast Utah, believe me, you want to be prepared. And so this is what Ernie wrote. He said, quote, when we started that long trip into the desert country, we prepared ourselves as though we were going from the Cape to Cairo. They outfitted their car with new tires, a shovel, a 5-gallon water can for the car's radiator, and a gallon of water for the pair of them. They brought a tire pump, tire patches, extra fan belts, extra oil, gunny sacks, a snake bite kit, a first aid kit, a pistol and a rifle, and a block of wood to balance a tire jack on in soft sand. Quote, of all this paraphernalia, we had no need for anything except the 2 cans of water, the funnel, and a tin cup. We never saw a snake. We never saw anything to shoot at except some prairie dogs. We didn't need our sardines, and the fan belt didn't break. But Pyle cautioned, yet if I were making that trip again, I wouldn't eliminate a thing. For it is possible to need all those things in the desert, and when you need them bad. So that was great, finding Pyle's comments. And then we get into World War II, it's over. We win because of the atomic bombs dropped on Japan. There's a rush for uranium, and it's Charlie Steen. Charlie Steen is an absolutely broke Texas geologist. He can't even afford the next tank of gas in his Jeep. He's had to sell his trailer. His wife and 2 or 3 kids are living in a shack in Cisco. And he is dead broke. He did one more little core sample drilling. He threw it in the back of the Jeep. It was an open Jeep. He's trying to borrow gas from the gas station attendant. Once upon a time, somebody came out and pumped your gas and cleaned your windows and all that stuff. And the gas station attendant says, what's in the back? Oh, just a bunch of rocks. Gas station attendant goes back in, brings out a Geiger counter, points it at the rocks, pegs the needle. Charlie Steen had found the largest uranium vein in the United States. Within a few years, a very short time, he would be making $50,000 a week. Not only does he make all the money on uranium, he starts a mill, and plenty of old mills here in Georgetown. Well, uranium mills are a little different, especially when they're producing radioactive material right next to the Colorado River. So you and I as taxpayers are now paying for that cleanup, which required a whole new railroad line from essentially Interstate 70 down into Moab, just to move all this bad dirt up and hide it back in the Bookhills. But anyway, as Charlie gets ready to designate that mill, the Atlas Mill, this is what he says. Prospectors whose sun-blistered brow, bunioned feet, seatless pants, croc haircuts, and insanely glittering eye show that they have qualified as bone-fried desert country-type prospectors and uranium hounds, thoroughly tested by blazing suns, freezing winds, reddish sandstorms, hungry scorpions, and the tall tales of crossroad and county seat barroom liars and promoters. Prospectors who have blistered their rumps riding burros and jeeps, have gone without baths and women, have trekked over deserts, climbed buttes, swum rivers, run rapids, and jumped arroyos, not to mention a few claims. Charlie Steen. And then my buddy Ed Abbey, whose work in southeast Utah will include trying to stop a highway, a federal highway. And this is what he had to say about this corner of southeast Utah. Quote, "Within this underslung, lopsided, rump-sprung, dough-bellied, highly irregular parallelogram lies the least inhabited, least inhibited, least developed, least improved, least civilized, least governed, least priest-ridden, most arid, most hostile, most lonesome, most grim, bleak, barren, desolate, and savage quarter of the state of Utah, the best part by far." So I just want to close with a few more words of my own, and then we'll do some slides, and then happy to answer questions. Rain comes to Red Rock country, and canyons become slick rock. We had hiked up a drainage and then skirted around a cliff face, angling ever higher. Light rain, the first of summer, scented the sage. I pulled a few sage leaves, turned them slowly between my fingers, then placed them in my nostrils for stamina and good luck. Higher we went. Just as we saw a rainbow off to the south, we spied an intricately built rock wall hundreds of feet beneath us. It was a carefully constructed refuge site or sentry point, protecting an ancient trail headed toward the top of a rocky ridge, all of Cedar Mesa and Bears Ears beyond. We stared at the wall with binoculars, admiring the craftsmanship and careful, patient placement of dressed stones set on a narrow ledge. I pivoted 180 degrees and found more ruins, wall segments, and a few small rooms, rounding the base of a solid sandstone pinnacle jutting into the sky. Rain cleared and slick rock shone in sparkling light, pools of water in every direction. We stood silent, surveying a wide sweep of canyon below us and two unexplored sites to either side. We would have to come back. As the sun dipped, we turned and began our long walk away from the cliff edge. A turkey vulture circled left, and a red-tailed hawk called from below. So, I do have some of these for sale along with some of those other books, but let me show you now, and I'll get my compañero here to help. So this is Bears Ears from the top. When you see it all across, you can see it for about 100 miles. You're looking at the other side. This is the meadow, and a lot of the native groups have an annual get-together here in June in this meadow.
Not go.
Yeah.
What direction are we looking there?
We're looking kind of southwest right now.
Okay.
This is Comb Ridge.
Oops, wait, I got a little carried away too.
Yeah.
Come on back. Oh, there's the other side.
Yeah,
There we go.
no. This is Comb Ridge from the top. And what's amazing about this, it's like a giant piece of pie. So if you look at the back of the crust, it's straight up and down, but you can actually walk up this, and it's sandstone. It's so much easier than walking on sand or dirt or mud. It's rock, and it's just beautiful. You're on the top of the world. And so this is Comb Ridge, Cedar Mesa's beyond, Bears Ears is over there. Next. One of the native folks I've worked with for a long time, this was Peter Pino. We were on the Mesa Verde Foundation board together, and it is so amazing to work with native elders. Now I'm working with this guy from Zuni, who's a basket maker, and their perspective of the landscape is really different, and especially looking at rock art or visiting sites with a proper native person is just quite an education. That is the mammoth. And what's on top of it is a bison that's also extinct. So that's Bison antiquus, and this is the mammoth. And there are some folks who say, no, it's not real, it's not, it's not authentic. But let me tell you, the three things here that absolutely make it a Colombian mammoth is the bifurcated trunk, the upward-facing tusks, and the top knot. Nobody could have drawn that unless they'd seen me. to get all those details correct. So on one stretch of the San Juan River, there's 5,000 years of rock art. Well, 11,000 years of rock art, and then close to it, there's 5,000 years of rock art. So in Bluff, we do pagan things. And, you know, Nevada has Burning Man. Well, we decided to burn a mammoth. And we also burned a couple of ravens, and we had all sorts of fun before COVID. But to set this on fire on December 21st, we got really carried away and used lit atlatl darts. We actually approached it with ancient spears. We set the spear tips on fire and then threw them at the mammoth. That was as pagan as you could get. That was quite an event. These are little, they're made from one piece of willow, and these are offerings. These are about 5,000 years old, the originals. They're found in the Grand Canyon. And river guides, I do a lot of river trips. I guide for different companies in the West. And good Grand Canyon river guides make these, and then they get better tips. You know, they give these to their clients. But so the same culture that made these next did extraordinary rock art of these elongated figures, and this is called Glen Canyon linear, and you can see why they're linear. But this rock is actually tipped. So this rock fell off a cliff, rolled downhill, and landed sideways. So for me to take this photograph, I am looking like this with the camera. So this is a really interesting, fun, rare site. I was just out there 2 weeks ago. Nobody was there. And yeah, this is quite a place. Next. So Chaco Canyon, when Chaco was abandoned in 1150 AD, where do the refugees go? Some go to Mesa Verde, but a lot of them go to Bears Ears. So Bears Ears probably had 5 different languages. It had different ethnic groups. It had different ancestral Puebloan people. And a buddy who's also got property in Bluff, but who is now back in Tucson, just finished his PhD at the University of Arizona on sandals. And he has proven that Chaco refugees, so the elite, the high status people of Chaco, had a special sandal. And when, just, you know, like a Nike tennis shoe. And when they came to Bears Ears, they kept wearing those sandals to prove their status. And he's found like 18 different rock art sites with this sandal pattern on it. So what an interesting thing. But that's exactly what national monuments are supposed to be for, is science. And this one, you know, we're just getting started. This is the cover of the book. This is a pretty interesting site. I was there 2 weeks ago, same thing, a little bit of snow, and that's why they call it Slick Rock. And so I didn't try and climb back in there. I've done it, but yeah, it's quite a cliff. Next. So what's great about it is Mesa Verde, there's ruins, there's rangers, there's places to park. Bears Ears, we don't want signs. We want you to go look. We want that sense of discovery. And so it's the little things that are just as much fun as the great big cliff dwellings. This is in the lower Mule Canyon. This one I discovered. I had been on a mesa looking across. Bluff has a really fun balloon festival, and we have it the weekend of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday weekend. And we always try and get a Canadian to come, so we can call it an international balloon festival. And so the festival was over. I'm taking a hike with that same dog. I'm looking across this valley with binoculars, and I see a window. And I think, what is that? I look again. No, it's a door. And then I realized it was a cliff dwelling. So I'm looking at it from 3 or 4 miles away. It takes me 6 months to find it, and this is it. And let me tell you, there's still 12 feet between the edge of this and that. So not only is it dangerous to get there, it's dangerous to jump across there. And as Bill and Beth Zagsitter did so well in their book, The Cliff Dwellings Speak, you know, these are truly, this is an architecture of defense. And why they had to do it is fascinating, lots of theories, but what remains are these incredible structures. Yeah, there's my Christmas point. And I happened to be, when I discovered this, I tripped in a wash, fell face forward, and kicked it out of the dirt, let out a yell. And I just happened to be hiking that day with a former BLM armed female cop who was the first armed female BLM ranger whose job it was to go after pot hunters. How lucky was I that she was right behind me with her little, you know, police kit, you know, little, you know, measuring tapes and this and that. So we photographed it, we documented it, and we reburied it. She's gone back a couple times to make sure it's still there. But, so I'm a photographer. I like, you know, photographing things. But rock art sometimes is so much more dramatic when it's drawn. And I lead different tours, sit there, seers, but I love taking artists because they slow things down, they're slower, I have to go slower. And this is fascinating. So this is an atlatl. These guys are dueling with atlatls. And why they're wearing sheep on their head, I have no idea. But yeah, so it's fun to extract just a little part of a panel. I love this. These are negative handprints. So a positive handprint, you put your hand in wet clay, the color you want, and then you put it on the wall. You put it on the rock. A negative handprint, you put the paint in your mouth. You get a reed of some sort, you put your hand against the wall, and you spit. And that's what that is. But negative handprints really seem to be coming out of the rock. I mean, there's something about them. They're just tacky. This is a very famous site. This is called Procession Panel. A buddy did this as a long time exposure. There are 100 different human figures all going to a party in this great kiva. These are atlatls. Yeah, this is a site, and you're very close to the top of Combe Ridge. It's very dramatic to get there. So, try and take wagons through that. This is what the Mormons faced. And so they had scouts ahead, 3 or 4 scouts, trying to figure out how to lead this whole wagon train, 225 wagons. And what they found that worked were ancient ancestral Puebloan roads. And so part of this, if you do it again in a Jeep, is called Road Canyon. And it's because the Mormons actually used parts of an ancestral Puebloan road. Yeah, this is the one, this is the one I was talking about. And here's the barrier to entry. All those loose little rocks were there. You know, we could walk to this. Here's where I felt so comfortable. And here's where we had to crawl to get way up to there. Maps. The first maps are 1776 with Dominguez and Escalante. And so in my book, I've got 15 maps. None of them will tell you anything. They're historic maps. I mean, the scale's all wrong. But what I love is when you find a place on a map and it says unknown. And there were parts of southeast Utah that were still unknown in 1915. I mean, nobody had been there. Wolf Killer is a Navajo who told his stories to Louisa Wetherill. Louisa Wetherill was one of the traders' wives, and Navajo is extremely difficult to learn as a language, in part because in the language everything is gendered. So everything is male or female, including rain, including parts of a house. There's parts of a Hogan where men can't go, the women can retreat, and men cannot cross this invisible line. I found out that the hard way one time in Canyon de Chelly. So she took Wolfkiller's story and turned it into a book manuscript. It was never published. The grandson published it. But she was so fluent in Navajo that the old chief Hashkinini thought she was a granddaughter, some kind of granddaughter that he didn't remember. And she was so honored and respected that she became his executor of his estate. And so he's got all these wives, all these children, all these sheep. She's the one who decides who gets what. And he dies in typical Navajo fashion. They kicked a hole in the Hogan so the spirit, the Chindi, could leave. The next morning, she's awoken before dawn by wails and cries and moaning. And she goes out of the trading post and looks, and the entire trading post is surrounded. There are 22 Ute women sitting in the dirt, keening. Hashkinini didn't tell her that part of his gift to her were these 22 Ute Indian wives. She woke up with 22 new dependents. So she had to build them a Hogan, find them sheep. That's 1910. 1910, this old Navajo chief still was doing all the tribal things and had these huge families. So, yeah, so Navajo medicine man. Next. That's Hashkinini. That's Louisa, and her nickname in Navajo was Slim Woman. This is on the Cone. There are still places where you can find historic Navajo sweat lodges and hogans. So most of it's rock, it's ancestral Puebloan, but some of it's, 1900, 1910, so 100-year-old Navajo artifacts. One of the four sacred mountains, Hesperus, this is right near Durango. This is really interesting. This is a pueblito. It's a cross between a Navajo structure and a Pueblo structure southeast of Farmington, New Mexico, and that's where the people who are now Navajo became Navajo. So the songs and the stories and the ceremonies all start in this area, two canyons, Gobernador and Largo. And so whoever comes over the land bridge, the last one's across and comes down the Continental Divide, those people, those clans become Navajo in places like this. Rock art, I love it. It's all palimpsest. So here you have ancestral Puebloan, 1,000-year-old rock art, and then historic Navajo horses right on top of it. This is one of the sites named after one of the Mormon scouts who is basically starving. He's trying to figure out how to get to what becomes Bluff. So this is called the Hobbs Room. The first Mormon bishop had survived the handcart disaster. Brigham Young tries to hurry up migration to Salt Lake City and decides handcarts will work instead of wagons, and these people leave too late and they starve and they get caught in an early blizzard, and so he frostbites his toes, is always in pain, but he's a very good leader for this Bluff community for over 30 years. One of the stone houses in Bluff, this was one of the ranchers, and that ranch included what's now part of Bears Ears, but also a slice of what's now Canyonlands National Park. And this rancher had the largest cattle raising permit, biggest permit for acreage in the United States, over 1 million acres. And we're talking about serious canyons. So these were not lazy cowboys. And that's how the Mormons basically succeeded driving the Texans out, was they worked harder. And you know, Texans were used to looking for cattle in chaparral, not in canyons. This is the site I told you. This was Highland Mary. And then the Navajo name, a little different. Next. Richard Wetherill, who will not only help discover Mesa Verde, but will get involved in the pot hunting, and pot hunts Chaco Canyon, actually tries to homestead Chaco Canyon. And so again, these pot hunting issues are what stimulates Congress to pass the Antiquities Act, to try and preserve our prehistoric heritage. There's Alice. She needs a movie. What an interesting character. Here's one of Wetherill's camps in Grand Gulch. And here's Richard's wife, who becomes quite a liar. She writes a couple of books that are not to be trusted. And one day they do find a mummy, and he's worried that the weather's going to warm up and the mummy's going to, decompose. And he's just worried about, rain and snow on the mummy. And so he asks Marietta, where should I put the mummy? And Marietta never called him Richard, always called him Mr. Wetherill. Marietta says, Mr. Wetherill, at the foot of the bed, at the foot of the bed.
Oh.
Some of the pot hunted materials from the Bluff area. Look at that, unexplored. So where the San Juan River and the Colorado River meet, that's now Canyonlands National Park. And then Bears Ears is everything to the south. In fact, if you look at it, up.
Oops, sorry. Wait, got carried away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is, way up on top here. So that's Comb Ridge. If you go straight up, it says Orejas del Oso, ears of the bear. Right there. So yeah, it was on all the old maps. Posey, a Ute, there's a Mormon action that as historians, we're still trying to figure out what to call it. Now we're basically thinking it's a lynching in 1923. And Indians can't testify in court. They're not citizens. And there's a big courthouse scuffle. Anyway, Posey is killed, and a friend of mine, a scholar, is working on how do we interpret this event. 2 Utes died, and 60 to 70 Utes were put in a World War I style stockade for 6 weeks. I mean, there's nothing legal about any of that, and yet it happened. Here's what the stockade looked like. And so, how do we interpret this? Do we do interpretive signs? And so they're calling it, the Utes are calling it 100 years of silence. And they want to tell this story, and my friend is working with them to that end. This is an interesting guy. He's a he's a Manhattan shirtwaist maker. So when you think of some of your historic photographs and what women are wearing, he's a shirtwaist maker who funds these expeditions into the Southwest. And so tracking him down and what did he discover and where did he go is in the book. There was even a plan for a national park that would have taken in Monument Valley. And of course the Navajos aren't consulted. They didn't want it, but serious plan that luckily didn't happen. This you can go to, it's called Two-Story House. And I guide for different people, and it's always interesting what folks have to say. And in this case, I was guiding with a Pitkin County fire marshal, whose job included final building inspections on all the rich houses in Aspen. And all he could talk about was the foundation. He said, look at that foundation. And it never occurred to me. He said, look at that foundation. And this is still 90 degrees. So that's an 800-year-old structure It's in perfect condition because of the foundation. This is an interesting story. It turns out there was a commune right on the edge of Bears Ears, and a woman who orchestrated this commune told everybody who joined, and they did in the Great Depression, that they had to eat fish, and there's no water for miles. I mean, it's like, where were the fish going to come from? Well, one of her tenets was reincarnation, that you joined this group and you would be reincarnated, and Jesus would show up about 12 miles away in front of this big rock. Well, one of the members died, and they didn't bury her. And finally word got out, and a physician comes, and the sheriff comes, and the physician says, well, she's not a health hazard. And the sheriff checked and said, well, we don't have any laws in Utah about burying people. That made big news, that there was an unburied person basically drying out in Utah. And so, you know, another interesting scandal in Bears Ears. Eventually they cremated her. Everett Roos disappears in southeast Utah in 1934. One of the last photographs of him. We own this. We have a really good Center of Southwest Studies on my campus, Fort Lewis College. So this is a black and white that's been hand tinted. Dark Canyon had never been explored. This is a group of sort of kind of explorer Boy Scouts heading into a place no one had been in the 1940s. We had an Episcopal priest leave one of the wealthiest parishes in Connecticut to come out and start a mission for the Navajos in 1943, Father Liebler. And the reason they trusted him is he never cut his hair in 1943. And he'd keep it in the same Chongo hairstyle as the Navajos. So this is another interesting story. And this is a mission that's still there. Kent Frost will do the first Jeep tours in Canyonlands. And here he is with a pistol. He would just go wandering across the desert. Pretty interesting guy. He's in the book. And I'm going to end with this.
Katie Lee.
Yes, none other than Katie Lee. And her preferred way to travel through the canyon country, she had red Keds and that hat. And that was it. So she really liked the full body experience. And here she is in a little pothole. And I was able to interview her. She was, wow, what was she, 84, 85, and in Arizona. And I interviewed her and I said, Katie, is it true, I have read that when you had your 80th birthday, you mountain biked through Bisbee, Arizona naked. Is that true? Did you do that on your 80th birthday? And she looked at me and said, no. I was 79. All right. Well, thank you very much.
We have to tell you about Katie Lee in Georgetown.
Tell me.
Yeah. So Katie Lee, in her book 10,000 Goddamn Cattle, was out trying to find who wrote Old Dolores, the song. And it was written by James Grafton Rogers, who at the time then, when she was looking for him, was living here in Georgetown and was the mayor and former all kinds of things. So she interviewed him, and anytime she came through here, she would stop at Aspen Grove and they would have a drink. I've got a tape of her, an oral history tape, where she's interviewing Dr. Rogers. But at our last program that John and Allison did, we all heard Katie Lee singing Old Dolores, and we sang along. Just saying, it's a small
She's amazing. She spelled out her support for Hillary as a presidential candidate with bras.
She did. She's buried in Bluff, isn't she, down by the,
You know, that I don't know.
I think by the river.
Her estate went to Northern Arizona University, all her photographs and stuff.
Ah, I gotta
But,
talk to them, okay.
Yeah. All right, any questions about Bears Ears?
Not
Yes, ma'am.
Bears Ears in particular, but when did the American Indians get the vote?
1924. So it's important. The Durango Herald will do an editorial on it, but I hope other newspapers do. So it'll be 100 years in June 6th. So how interesting that, you know, white men could vote, then African American men, then women, and it took until 1924 for Native Americans to become citizens. And to this day, there is no minority group in America with a higher rate of enlistment in the armed forces than Native American.
Is there a commissioner in San Juan County now who's Native American?
Yes, San Juan County, Utah is 57%
Yeah.
Native American.
But I thought that somebody had run for in one office, which seemed
Yeah, we had two
yeah.
Navajos, Democrats who ran during all the Bears Ears stuff. They've since left, and they may come back.
Yeah.
You know, county commissioners cycle every 3 years.
Wow.
Any other questions?
I'm overwhelmed. I love it. Come back.
Yeah.
Come
All
back
right.
with the
Well, I've
next
got some
one.
books. If anybody's interested, you can either do cash or a check to the campus bookstore. So thank you very much. And again, if you want it to snow in April, just call me.